today's digital world. Equitable access to these resources, including broadband and internet technology, is critical to helping every Baltimorean succeed in their daily lives and realize their future dreams. Here, like in many places, we've seen the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbate pre-existing broadband inequities, making it difficult for residents to access technology for remote working, virtual learning, and telehealth, widening the divide between the digital have and the have-nots. But while the pandemic has been difficult to navigate, I will say that COVID-19 has been a point of reckoning for us all. We know that we must be continuously laser focused on making the necessary investments to ensure that everyone has access to the modern technology and training that they need to be successful. And with the help of our first ever Director of Broadband and Digital Equity, we will do just that. Simply put, improving broadband access means boosting equity in Baltimore, and we will not stop until the digital divide is closed for good. Just like electricity in the last century, broadband has become this century's critical infrastructure and a basic tenet of modern civil society.
Hello to all, and welcome to those of you who are just joining us for our Next Century Cities 2021 conference. We truly believe that in 2021, broadband is the electricity of the 21st century that can light up every community in America. My name is Medvis Jackson. As a research fellow with Next Century Cities, I have had the privilege of studying the social challenges in various cities presented by a lack of access to or a low adoption of high-speed internet. In our next panel, our guests will help us to rethink benchmarks for success, and specifically, what would ubiquitous broadband connectivity enable? Here to help us discuss that question and very real possibilities are four amazing guests and panelists: Darrah Blackwater, Aaron Brumley, Tia Price, and Chris Wood. Aaron Brumley has worked with technology at the Lawrence Public Library of Lawrence, Kansas for the past 10 years. He has managed the IT department since 2016, and until recently has also supervised a public service department dedicated to serving community technology needs. Tia Price, for pronouns she, hers, serves as the Baltimore Digital Equity Coalition BDEC director, where she brings individuals and organizations together to advance digital equity and bridge the digital divide. Before BDEC, Price was the director of programs and HR specialist for Wide Angle Youth Media and was awarded the Jewel Ryan White Award for her outstanding contributions to processes that encourage, facilitate, and create culturally diverse community involvement in media. Darrah Blackwater is a citizen of the Navajo Nation and a 2020 graduate of the University of Arizona. She has assisted in building multiple community networks in Indigenous communities, and her legal scholarship focuses on spectrum sovereignty, Native nations' inherent rights to electromagnetic spectrum, which is a natural resource. In 2012, Chris Wood co-founded the LGBT Technology Partnership, which focuses on advocacy for LGBT individuals and communities as it relates to technology and the policies that govern it. He is a seasoned tech policy advocate who has previously served on the Federal Communication Commission's Advisory Council on Diversity and Digital Empowerment. I would like to encourage you to also refer to our program online that will give you a full bio and give you a better appreciation for what each of these panelists has done in their career. If you are just tuning in, again, you're welcome to post your comments and your questions for our panelists in our Zoom chat. We will address as many as possible later on in our discussion. Also feel free to share your thoughts on LinkedIn or Twitter so that your conversation can continue long beyond today's panel discussion. As local economies have reopened in the United States for more normal consumer activity after the latest peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, advocates, policymakers, and elected officials are having to make sense of the lessons learned about our nation's digital divide and how we may be able to work to close those gaps. So in just a few sentences, I would like for each of our panelists to share how investing time and resources into broadband adoption and digital inclusion strategies would make broadband deployment strategies more effective. And we can start with you, Mr. Chris Wood.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me today, and I really appreciate being here. You know, one of the places that we really try to draw a lot of our lessons from and learning how to really take care of our community is through our Power On program. I think, and that really kind of understates that the number one thing that we really need to be doing as organizations is really understanding our community's needs and meeting them where they are. And so by doing research and actually building minimum viable projects or programs, we actually can achieve that. And that's what we did with the Power On program. We launched in Washington, D.C. with 25 cell phones with data, talk, and text without any barriers to that, meaning that individuals had data, talk, and text for 12 months without having what I like to refer to as the carrot and the stick. Those that are really, you know, facing some of the hardest challenges, those that are housing insecure, many of which identify as LGBTQ, already face uphill challenges and battles. And so what we really wanted to understand was what does a cell phone mean for those individuals? And by putting those cell phones on the streets of Washington, D.C. with data, talk, and text and no limitations, we were able to understand that 80% of them left the area for whatever reason, and we lost contact with them. But 20% of them, we stayed in contact with them and were able to better understand how the cell phones worked with them. And eventually we were actually able to catch up with some of those 80% that were no longer part of the program, the Power On program, but learning that they had moved to a different city. And so I bring all that up because it's really important that we ground ourselves in research, that we understand the true impacts and the needs of the community in order to really be able to deploy a network and work with companies to deploy a network that is actually going to serve the communities that need it most, that are going to serve the communities that are underserved and connect with them where they are. And furthermore, once we got into the program, we really started to understand more by doing, when we were providing devices through our Power On program. And as we've grown now from that one location in Washington, D.C. to now 54 locations across 31 states and U.S. territories, stretching from Alaska to Puerto Rico. We now understand, and when we distribute those devices, we get testimonials and information from them. And then we follow up with them and follow up with the centers and get more information back. So it is a continuous cycle of research, implement, create a minimum viable program, and understand where individuals are trying to connect, needing to connect, aren't connecting. And I think that all of that plays together. And I really feel that NGOs, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies play a crucial role in that entire life cycle of understanding where to go ahead and deploy broadband and actually then continue educating individuals on how to get connected and what the best way is.
Darrah?
Sure. Yeah, I'll definitely echo what Chris said. There's so much to be said about just awareness of meeting people where they are, awareness of the challenges and barriers that people have in connecting. And I'll just share a few thoughts, mostly from other people. Honestly, when the coronavirus first hit, I was a student. I was finishing my third year of law school at the University of Arizona, and people were reaching out to really anyone in Indian country who knew anything about the internet, because we were having to figure things out on the fly for students to be able to keep up with their education because they were going home to be safe and their homes were not connected, especially on reservation lands. And so we were really having to, one, figure out how to help get them connected, and two, figure out how to help them keep their education going, knowing that they weren't going to be connected immediately. So a lot of the questions that I get through social media is about, people who are not Indigenous who want to be allies. And I love it because there's a hunger for wanting to know, how do we help? How do we get involved? And for educators last year, that meant understanding how to meet students where they were, knowing that they couldn't be connected. They were mailing assignments out. This is from a university. Professors were having to mail students assignments and have them mail it back. And so you think about how far that puts people behind and how far that puts Native students behind in the education that they're so desperately wanting and trying to actively participate in. Jeffrey Blackwell, one of my colleagues, put it well that, we're having to figure out how to connect while other people are leaving us behind, figuring out how to utilize platforms to best educate their children or their students. And we're not even having that conversation yet. The ubiquity of the internet is not present on Native lands. The need for it is, but not the internet itself. And then one of my colleagues at ASU, Tracy Morris, she shared an anecdote about how somebody in their school sent out an email to ask who was connected. And they said, oh, well, we got a lot of emails back, so everyone's connected, we're good. And so there's just like these thought processes about connection and this assumption that the internet and connection is ubiquitous when it really isn't. And so echoing what Chris said, just meeting people where they are and really taking a minute to understand that this isn't, that we're not on the same playing field here, I think is the most important first step for sure.
Thank you. And for Aaron?
Thank you, Medvis. I'm Aaron Brumley. I'm the IT coordinator at the Lawrence Public Library of Lawrence, Kansas. Lawrence, Kansas is a community in Northeast Kansas with a population of about 98,000. We're home to the University of Kansas and Haskell Indian Nations University. Our community has a very high level of educational attainment with about 53% holding a bachelor's degree or higher. We have also a pretty high poverty rate of about 20%. Many of them college educated. Access to broadband is absolutely essential for participation in modern society and full participation in our democracy. Libraries are an essential component in bridging that gap and promoting adoption. During the pandemic, we saw that role highlighted very dramatically when we had to close our doors and heard from members of our community who were desperate to be able to access benefits, apply for unemployment, seek work, just to participate in society. And we were unable to provide the internet connectivity that they needed because our model was based on access to a building. So many libraries have sought to adopt hotspot lending programs even before the pandemic, but we had not been one of those libraries and were only able to do that after in response to the pandemic. But during that closure, we were unable to provide very much of anything. We sought to extend Wi-Fi access as well as we could by repositioning access points toward the exterior of our building and trying to give just a little bit of outdoor coverage, but that was not very successful. So there was a desperate community need which we were not prepared to meet and which was strongly highlighted by this circumstance. Investment in libraries seems like it would be an excellent way of reaching the communities that are most in need. We see those people every day on the ground. We help them in a computer lab environment with accessing services and filling out job applications. We are a point of contact for the people who need these services. Meeting those challenges will require investment, and libraries are a great place, I think, to do that.
And last but not least, Tia, would you like to kind of share some of your experiences on this question?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll first share, I'm the director of the Baltimore Digital Equity Coalition, and the coalition was formed in March of 2020 as a rapid response to the pandemic. You know, libraries were closing, schools were closing. I was teaching at the moment in schools, and folks I know personally from being a teacher, you know, folks really needed access to the internet, and Darrah and Chris and Aaron, you all spoke to this. We know that access is essential, and it's also essential that we for those of us that care about digital equity, to make sure that we are connecting with those that are most impacted. And you all have mentioned this. And hey, Brandon, you all have mentioned this in your statements there. I think it's important, and I'll speak as my own person, not BDEC, to pay folks for their lived experiences. You know, I used to not have access to the internet. I currently do. So I don't know what it's like to not be connected. I don't know what people need. And for me to develop the solutions with folks, I need their time, and that time is money. And so, you know, I think it's really important to pay folks to develop solutions with them. And then for the community to also be able to say, if we met their needs. I think that it's too often that we say, well, we accomplished this because we set our metrics and achieved them. But I think in order for us to have ubiquitous broadband, we really need to ensure that the communities that most need it are receiving it. We need to ask, hey, community that's most impacted that we've been working alongside of, is this working for you? And if not, how can we redesign something that will work? And there's a lot that I learned that folks at BDEC are learning. I thought that just having access to something like, you know, wired broadband at home would work for everyone. But then I realized that there are some households, like multifamily households, and I was ashamed, honestly, of how ignorant I was that that solution doesn't work. You know, but it's only through speaking with those that are most impacted or those that are trusted community stakeholders that we can figure this out and then be able to design solutions that do work and will shape the future of digital equity.
Awesome. And just to stay with you, Tia, you know, so much of your amazing work in Baltimore around digital inclusion and equity has been influenced by your own personal development and your engagement with the internet as a young person. Would you like to share with us a key effort being developed and implemented currently by the Baltimore Digital Equity Coalition that will help local organizations to better connect their community members in the future? How does your personal identity or journey help you do this work well?
Absolutely. So the coalition works under a collective impact model. And so we organize under a common agenda, shared measurement systems, mutually reinforcing activities, and continuous communication. So BDEC serves as the support organization, and we focus on collaboration and maximizing resources and having the greatest impact. Now, I was hired, while the coalition was formed in March of 2020, I was hired in January of 2021. I made a deliberate choice to leave the classroom for a lot of reasons. One of which my mother was ill at the time. And so I needed freedom, which I wasn't getting from working 80 hours a week as a teacher. But I made the choice to join BDEC because I saw the power of organizations working collaboratively together. But I kept getting tripped up on this collective impact model. So Tom Wolfe is a nationally recognized consultant on coalition building and community development. And he really aptly described my unease with this collective impact model. He said in an article critiquing CI that without engaging those directly affected, which all of us here have talked about, collective impact can develop neither an adequate understanding of the root causes of the issues, nor an appropriate vision for a transformed community. I felt like I was going to church when I was reading these words. I was like, he really put what I was saying into words. He said, instead, the process will likely reinforce the dominance of those with privilege, you know, which all of us connected right now, that's us, and continue to support the existing nonprofit helping sector that works without creating changes based on meaningful community input and involvement. So I felt like I was going to church because I heard those words and I really understood what he was saying, but I was like, how do we do this? And also, I often think of things from the lens of my experience. All of us do. I just choose to name it. Okay. So I want to name why that was important to me. So my mom was the first person in my family to go to college, and she earned not one, but 2 college degrees. And part of my childhood was spent with her in a small, poor, segregated town in West Virginia. And when I was about 6 or 7 years old, she saved up all the money she had, and she bought my brother and I our first Gateway computer with the Cal box and the AOL CD, the dial-up, all the whole 9 yards, right? And we were the only ones in our town that had this computer. It was as big as our town in comparison to computers now. But that computer gave birth to the foundation of my future. It allowed me to see worlds outside of the poverty that I was growing up in. I did leave one thing out for my story, though. It's shortly after my mom bought that computer, she was incarcerated and lost custody of my brother and I due to her crack addiction. And I often lead and share this experience, especially in a city like Baltimore, with my skin privilege. I think it's important to name that, because when I look at the community I live in East Baltimore, which is also poor and segregated, I don't see that my community is in need of help. I see people just as bright as my mother who have been oppressed by a system upon a system upon a system that doesn't help, but instead suffocates folks. So in Baltimore, what we're doing is we're making a conscious effort to do things differently, to integrate folks that are most impacted in a meaningful way. We'll be this month, this is my first time really talking about it, outside of talking with Medvis earlier. We'll be gathering data to establish a baseline of digital equity needs from 12 organizations serving those that are most impacted across Baltimore, training and paying trusted community stakeholders to become digital navigators to connect those that are most impacted, and sharing our public progress publicly so the community can hold us accountable. If we're not doing our job, I need you on my phone. I need you in my inbox to tell me we're not meeting folks' expectations. We'll also be gathering demographic data, because connecting people to skills, computer, internet, that's not it, right? 9 out of 10 jobs will require basic digital literacy. And that was a report that came out 2 years ago. So that's 8 years. So our goal is also to stay in contact with folks, see if there's ways that we can support all these organizations. There's 60 member organizations that are part of the coalition. How can we create a community of care? Because the internet shouldn't just be about school and work. It should be about creating communities, create a community of care where we can connect people to resources and see that they are having these conversations, and that we don't need Baltimore Digital Equity Coalitions, because everyone will be connected.
Thank you so much. And we'll go to Chris, because Tia spoke so much about, the need to have that community connection and understanding, how are we best meeting the needs of the people that we serve. With the deployment of the Power On program, you also did a bit of empowerment as well for the people that you were providing services to. Do you feel that this model is one that can scale, and how do you envision it scaling in a way that, again, it makes broadband itself a service and utility that's viewed as ubiquitous, like electricity, kind of like water?
I mean, I think it's crucial. I think, as I'm thinking about what a lot of the panelists have said here today is looking at COVID and looking at the emergency broadband benefit that was finally deployed, and having for years kind of beaten my chest and really kind of been vocal about the fact that, the Lifeline program provided $9.95 or something like that towards connectivity, which is just mind-blowing to me. And quite frankly, I've sat next to individuals who are part of the Power On program and have received technology, and asked them about getting online and why they may still stay late at school or go to the LGBT center to get online. And it's because the Lifeline program and the $9.95 doesn't do enough and hasn't done enough for a long time. And it's really behind. And so the emergency broadband benefit, we were really excited about it because we were getting there. We were getting closer to it. And obviously there's a lot of pieces here with broadband deployment. There's underserved and unserved areas entirely. I live in Central Virginia. I don't live in a major hub, so I'm very familiar with what it is not only for just everyday individuals to be connected out here, but if you are facing economic challenges and barriers, if the LGBTQ community is not a monolith. So if you're you may identify with several minorities, which may have you face many of the barriers and challenges that Tia spoke about. And it's just layers upon layers. And then on top of that, as the president and founder of the local LGBT center here in Shenandoah Valley, one of the other really disheartening things to get was phone calls from youth about being kicked out of their home, their bio home. And so on top of everything else that you're facing, probably already being out of school, having to figure out how you're going to get your schoolwork done. The mailed assignments was a new one for me. I hadn't heard that one yet. But all of these challenges that continue to layer on top just continue to show the absolute crucial need. And what I think all of us on this panel have been saying well before COVID is that the internet and access to the internet is a human right at this point, because so many services, so many things have been put onto that system, including the basic needs of housing and shelter and jobs and all of those basic needs that we need in order to survive. And then we have the audacity to say, or anyone has the audacity to say, that it's not a basic human service and that it shouldn't be open and equal to all. I think that the past year has shown that to a lot of people and opened a lot of individuals' eyes. And I think that's an important step. For the Power On program, I think it's, I'm really excited to hear kind of what you're doing, Tia, because in Baltimore, because this is kind of the things that we've been doing for the last 5 years within our community on a nationwide scale, is learning more and more. So yeah, we started with those centers and our first year of collecting data was not that great. And we tried our best because you're also working with vulnerable populations. And the last thing you want to do, I recognize my status. I recognize I'm a gay white male and I didn't have it as hard maybe as some of the individuals that I get the wonderful opportunity to talk with every single day. But we've really got to level the playing field here, and we have to allow them the space and breadth to tell their story and explain how hard it has been for them if they want to, so that we can better understand, so that we can better help. And we have to open those doors and open those channels to be able to listen to those, especially for those that are not connected. So I think we have a lot of work to do in this area. I think that even though each year we've learned with the Power On program, we've grown now almost 10 centers a year. Now we're really looking to reach back and figure out, okay, how do we begin to roll out digital equity on a national scale? How do we roll out digital education on a national scale? How do we use programs that are already in cities like Baltimore, that they're already doing education programs? So let's not reduplicate the wheel. Let's work with partners in that area that are actually already doing this, which is really a really strong key that I'll leave with this. And I hope it answered your question, because I realized I bounced around a little bit. But one of the things that we noticed when we ran our pilot program in DC was that from a national scale, we couldn't have that local connection in the same way that a local community organization could, or a public library. We're huge fans of public libraries, and public libraries have for a very long time been one of the safest spaces for LGBTQ folks to go. And so I think we have an opportunity to really lift up resources and organizations that are in those local areas by providing them grants, providing them information, grants like the Power On program does. We provide the hardware and the technology to them. They get to distribute that. They get to have that touch point with that individual. They get to give them that cell phone. They may never know that it came from the Power On program, but the most important thing is that together we are raising up those local organizations. We're creating those local connections. We're creating the safety net that allows people to feel like they can connect with someone, ask some questions, get online, and go through the very hard process of getting set up online and get it moving, which is important. It's a lot harder than just saying, here's a phone, here's an internet connection, now go. That doesn't work, and that's not going to make someone successful in a really positive way.
Thank you. And as Chris, as you kind of talked about how you were able to launch this program and really figure out how it could go even further, again, taking us towards ubiquitous broadband in the United States. You were primarily working, from my understanding, in a mostly urban environment, correct?
Urban and rural. We are completely around the island of Puerto Rico. We are in several like smaller locations across the United States, and that's where we had focused. Sure, there is a huge need in urban communities because you have a larger concentration of those who are going to identify as or housing insecure or be in a housing insecure situation. But we actually have a bigger problem in rural, especially when you get into the major Midwest states that you have one center serving 600 square miles. It's a really big deal. And then on top of that, not having connectivity from county to county, depending on how good or bad it is. So no, we serve actually both.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, because it kind of takes me to my next question to Darrah. Discussing the fact that the history around Native nations in the United States is very troublesome, it's complex. And you've been looking to adjust some very structural barriers to internet access and adoption in Native Nation communities. So while not all Native Nation members live in a rural setting, many do. So would you mind sharing an experience that deeply underscored some of the foundational bias with which Native nations are treated by those who deploy telecommunications infrastructure? How is that experience informing how you and your colleagues are charting new paths towards ubiquitous broadband? You're on mute.
Thank you. I guess this is sort of going back to my origin story of how I got started with this work in the first place, which was when I was in law school. I went out to be an intern with the Udall Foundation. I was placed in the Department of Interior under the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs, who is the head of the BIA and the BIE, among other programs within the Department of Interior. And I was the youngest person in the Asia office. Asia is Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs. And so they kind of said, we don't know what to do with this digital divide thing. This internet thing is overwhelming. We're short-staffed because it's kind of a skeleton crew under that administration. As you can imagine, this was in 2018. And so they said, you go do it. And so I, put on my heels and I was going all over Washington, D.C. to try to figure out what was going on with tribal broadband. And this was not something I had any background in whatsoever, but I just learned and went into sponge mode and just soaked up as much as I could. And I found myself in some really strange corners of Washington, D.C., which if you guys have been out there very much, I'm sure you've found yourself in those same places. So when I found that when I was doing broadband meetings for tribal stuff, I was in like these literal closets in the Longworth building, just like somebody was presenting on it and all of the representatives were sending like these college students to basically do the same thing I was doing of like, go figure this out, report back. And we were crammed into these tiny little corners of the Longworth building, just trying to learn from these people. There were people standing in the hallway just trying to listen. And then I remember that same week after that Longworth meeting, there was it was Ryan Zinke was the Secretary of Interior at the time, and he held a meeting about connecting the national parks. And that was in the penthouse of the Department of Interior with this beautiful rooftop view overlooking the mall and the Washington Monument. And, it was all of the ISPs and their contractors there, and they're joking with Secretary Zinke about, who's suing him and welcome to everyone who's not suing me right now and ha, ha, ha. And I was just thinking at the time, wow, I would love for there to be a room full of tribal leaders and tribal broadband leaders here having these same laughs and having these same conversations and the same camaraderie with the Secretary of Interior, which now maybe that's possible because Jeff Holland is the Secretary of Interior. But at the time it was so disheartening to feel like tribal broadband was shoved into the dark corners of DC. And then for, the national parks, which I think last time I looked, it was like 77% 77% of people who attend national parks are white people. And we look at the disparity of who needs to be connected in this country, and that's not who it is. And so that actually inspired me last year after I graduated from law school. I wanted to go see the land that I had spent so much time learning to protect. So I walked the Colorado Trail, which is 486 miles from Denver to Durango, which is all former Ute land. It used to be Ute land, and now it's a mixture of national parks and USDA land and everything else. And, most of the people out there through hiking were white, and they were complaining about how there wasn't any connectivity. And I was just able to kind of take all of my experiences and culminate them into that trip in order to utilize that to educate people about the digital divide, about Indigenous issues, about all of the things that I'd seen shoved into corners before, that I was able to kind of bring to light and say, hey, this is a huge issue. And it was cool because a lot of outdoors people, a lot of outdoors pages and backpacking pages and gear pages were all sharing my information about the digital divide, which gave me hope, because it's like, okay, even if the highest people in this land don't care, a lot of, outdoors companies and backpackers and people who really understand what it's like to be disconnected and what a privilege for them, it's a privilege to be disconnected. For us, it's just life to be disconnected on reservations. So, that is kind of just these juxtapositions that the best I can express them of, what we're dealing with in this country.
Thank you so much. And as someone who's my heart's deep into the libraries here in Detroit, Michigan, Aaron, like our other speakers, you're also on the front lines trying to keep families connected, while also trying to enhance and increase the level of connectivity that they enjoy. However, while so many of the panelists are working to innovate new programs and also deploy new infrastructure, the library has been doing a lot of this work for a very long time, in addition to making sure that Americans are just mastering very basic literacy and critical reading skills. As we move towards ubiquitous broadband in this country, what are some of the local lessons your team has learned over the last couple of years, or even longer than that, to help us as a country to work faster and more effectively towards ubiquitous broadband?
Well, I would absolutely agree that libraries have been involved in getting people connected for a long time, well before the pandemic struck. Digital literacy programs have been a part of what we do for a long time. We have sought to provide basic instruction on how to access services and websites, entertainment, all forms of content that you can access via the internet here at the Lawrence Public Library and at libraries across the country for decades now. Thinking about the specific programs that we sought to implement during the pandemic, what Chris mentioned about Lifeline comes to mind. One of the programs that we sought to develop here was to create a gap fund. We used CARES Act money to seek to supplement Lifeline assistance programs for in-home connectivity to connect anyone who is eligible for Lifeline for a year of free internet access. And that was moderately successful, but we faced some challenges with that. The Lifeline program, that $9, that supplement does not go very far, certainly, as Chris said. We learned from many of the people that we were trying to assist that Lifeline qualifying internet services were not sufficient to meet their needs. They were eligible, many of them, for a level of service that just couldn't do what they wanted it to do. It was technically broadband, but did not perform up to their expectations. So some people, although eligible, chose not to accept Lifeline in order to be able to get a better quality of service, just to be able to meet their work and educational needs, entertainment needs. So we sought to connect as many people as we could through that. Part of that problem was that side of things, where the quality of service was maybe not quite what people wanted or expected. Another part of the problem was reaching people who would be eligible for these services, because the threshold for eligibility is very low. Your income requirements are pretty strict. So finding the people who were eligible and wanted the service it proved very challenging for the library. We sought to partner with other community stakeholders. We became part of the Lawrence and Douglas County Digital Equity and Inclusion Coalition, which started up very early in the pandemic. I think we started in March or possibly May. That partnership group really was a great environment in which to talk about ideas of how to apply federal funding and different ways we could seek to bridge that gap. That has persisted throughout the pandemic, and we're intending to continue it going forward to work with our partners here in the county to understand what we can do to meet the needs. The Lawrence Public Library and libraries across the country seem like great locations for people to access some of these services that we're providing. We're really just part of a large network of groups that can seek to find those solutions. And then we hope to be a venue for people to access some of those services. Other programs that we sought to deploy during the pandemic and had some success with, we offered Chromebooks, 50 of those to people in our community, also hotspots, 50 of those devices. We partnered with local social service organizations to get devices into the hands of about a dozen groups around town that have direct service roles working with clients. Part of the challenge with libraries is that our service model is such that we reach everyone. We don't specifically reach the people who most need things necessarily, although we're a great resource for underserved populations in our community. We serve everyone equally. So we can't necessarily parse who needs something more than someone else, whereas our community partners were able to do some of that. The local housing authority, for example, is better positioned to understand who needs access than we necessarily are. So if we're handing a hotspot to someone, they may just be taking it on vacation. Whereas if the housing authority is handing someone a hotspot, it's because they really need it. So we sought to do something of that with community partners, although we had mixed results. Our community partners were not all prepared to enter into new areas of work. So that was something that we experienced. Working with a dozen different organizations was a challenge in itself. And then the requirements of those organizations to dedicate some staff hours to facilitate access to devices, it just proved not to work for some of them. So some of those devices end up coming back to us and being circulated to our lending population. So some things worked, some things didn't. The Lifeline Assistance Program, we were prepared to connect up to 200 community members with this supplemental funding. We only got 60 ultimately, which is not too bad, but it was less than we had hoped. And there were challenges within that we weren't expecting. So I would say that we've had some successes. We did deploy outdoor Wi-Fi in order to meet the need of people within a couple of blocks of our building. That was successful, but again, it's a little early to tell what ultimately that will achieve. We don't see lots of people sitting right outside the library doing their homework, that sort of thing, but it's a long-term investment that pays off to have for us for a long time. So libraries are prepared to be the on-the-ground source for connecting individuals with services.
Thank you. And we're going to do a quick lightning round because we have a question here. So try and keep your responses as we try to squeeze it in before 5 o'clock. Keep your responses to about 30 seconds or so. So it's a little bit of a challenge for all of us, including myself. So the question, besides broadband affordability and accessibility, what would you say is the important metric or metrics to keep an eye on if we want to understand if and how we're making ubiquitous broadband a reality? So we'll start with Aaron, we'll go to Darrah, Chris, and then we'll let Tia give us the final masterpiece at the end of this.
So the question is how we identify success. Is that?
What would be the most important metric to identify the amount of success that we're actually making? So I really,
Right.
Would this kind of thing tell us whether we're on track or not?
We would love to see the connected households be 100% in our community, but I'm in the library environment. We really rely a lot on the stories of individual people and what kind of difference it made to them. So understanding anecdotal evidence is very important to know what that connectivity meant to the individuals who've been connected. So I would say go beyond metrics and see what the stories really are.
Darrah?
I'm going to say ask tribal leadership. If you're talking about tribal lands or Indigenous communities, asking tribal leadership is going to be the best way to know whether those people are connected, because they're the ones who should be telling you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and kind of go a little bit broad. I would say, because I was thinking about it from a job perspective, I was thinking about it from a financial perspective. I really think it's financial digital participation and seeing where we've been as far as the demographics that have been participating in that. And now, and where this really resonates with me is last week, and then I'll finish up really quickly. Last week, I actually had an amazing conversation with a Uber driver in Atlanta who, if you look at someone, you judge them by the book, you wouldn't even realize that he was a day trader. And yet we had a full-blown 45-minute conversation about day trading. And he was so incredibly knowledgeable. And he had just gotten into it within the last year or year and a half. And I was just like, that is true metrics and participation and being able to financially take care of yourself or participate where our communities have not necessarily always been able to participate. And I think it's an important measurement.
Thank you. Very insightful. And Tia.
Yeah, so I loved what everyone said, and I just captured, Aaron mentioned go beyond data. Darrah mentioned also that ask those in the communities that you're connecting what those metrics are. And I'll just add one thing onto it, that there's a lot of studies that are happening right now using broadband or broadband studies to increase broadband in communities and collective impact models that are using agile methodologies and Scrum. And I think it's fascinating because Agile Methodologies and Scrum is really just community organizing. So it's like focusing on the end user and designing with and for them, which I think is just really interesting. But anyway, so if we could bring that tech approach or really that organizing mentality to this work and look at trends. So one of the things that we'll be doing in the coalition is adapting a Scrum approach. So what's working, or what have you done last month? What are you doing this month? And what are the barriers that are blocking your success? And then we'll be monitoring those trends and then, standing up temporary working groups to address those blockers over time. So I recommend that.
Awesome. And earlier today we had, a number of people talk about the importance of planning and planning early, and you really can't plan too much because this work can be so monumental and you're going to get so much structural barriers that you really need a united front. And so I trust that with folks like yourselves, that the future will be something that we'd all want to live in terms of the digital connectivity. A few comments from the chat. We have Brandon says, love to see another Jayhawker here. Francella said that librarians are the original, are the digital social workers, she says. And then we have Amy Van de Velde, who says, librarians are often the nation's help desk too, exclamation point. I want to thank you all for joining us today. As I heard an activist in Detroit say once, the history that we know now was something that was in someone's head at one point. The homes that we live in now was something that was in someone's head at one point. And so understand that you're all capable of designing a future that is bold, to make demands that are very daring, and then to implement a future, again, that we all want to live in. I'm going to turn it over for the closing. But again, I want to thank you all for being here and go out and help us keep claiming this future that we want.